I have to. So cool.
Okay, welcome everybody to the second episode of our journal club on Indian philosophy, and we can start right into it. Please, Sai, you want to present the paper?
Yes, so we're kind of discussing a small chapter from a book that's a collection of papers that was discussed in an international seminar at the Ramakrishna Mission in Kolkata, in India, in 2007, I think. The book is called Spirituality and Science of Consciousness, and the chapter we're discussing is called Ancient Wisdom, Modern Questions, Vedantic Perspective and Consciousness Studies. It's written and narrated by Swami Sarvapriyananda. So in the introduction, he talks about how humans in general find it very difficult to give a satisfactory account or a definition of few things which are very familiar to us, but when we try to define them formally, it gets very hard. He gives an example of like time, space, matter, mind, love, and the self. And then he makes a point that, to define a concept, we usually use more fundamental concepts. And he thinks that from a subjective point of view, what can be more fundamental than consciousness itself? And that's the reason why, despite it being so familiar to us, we still have a really hard time defining it formally. Uh, Actually, each school of Indian philosophy has a long tradition in talking about consciousness, and most of them have a common goal, which is to attain moksha or nirvana, which is called the release from the suffering of the world. And keeping this as the central theme, many of these schools then make knowledge an essential part to obtain this release. Uh, we don't really yet know, or we can explore more later rather, what do they mean by knowledge in this regard. But they also talk about what is the root cause of this bondage to the worldly suffering that's causing the worldly suffering to us. And they say that it's ignorance, and knowledge, once we gain knowledge, knowledge removes this ignorance, and that's how this bondage is destroyed, and you attain this transcendental freedom or nirvana or moksha. And that's why it became like super important in these old texts to explore the relationship between knowledge and this release. And it somehow became then inextricably linked to consciousness. And a theory of consciousness then became an indispensable precursor for this epistemology. We can definitely, I think, discuss more on like what do they mean about knowledge, because I'm also not like super sure. Uh, but when it comes to Advaita Vedanta, which treats consciousness as identical to being itself, it thinks of it as it's the ground truth, as it's the possibility of knowledge and also the source of knowledge in life. And consciousness in Advaita Vedanta is basically the focus of the whole metaphysics and the epistemology and the axiology of the entire philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. In the chapter, then they later discuss about the hard problem of consciousness, as was introduced by David Chalmers in 1995. The hard problem, as probably everybody knows, is the problem of explaining the relationship between the objective physical world and our subjective conscious experience. And the easy problem, well, not so easy for scientists, of course, on the contrast and concerns with the objective study of the brain about how the brain causes a wide range of behaviors and mapping those brain states and the physiological causes to the observed behavior. But all of this, the easy problems, even if we have the answers to all of this, it still might not explain the subjective feelings that are involved and that arise because of these interactions. And that is why David Chalmers framed it as the hard problem of consciousness. Now, in the chapter that we are reading, they discuss about the hard problem, and they also point out that the hard problem is a modern variation of the older Descartes mind-body dualism debate. And they explore a little bit about what Descartes believed, that there is a realm of mind and there is a realm of matter, and the whole mind versus matter debate. and how Bishop Berkeley then offered a solution to it, which was called idealism, which ended up denying the whole existence of the material world, thus reducing all of that to the mind. And in this regard, they also try to point it out that Advaita Vedanta is actually misunderstood to be similar to Berkeley's idealism concept, whereas it is much more similar to realism rather than idealism, because in Advaita Vedanta, mind is called Jada, which is like an insentient matter. So mind is still matter in Advaita Vedanta. That makes it not similar to idealism at all. Uh, but as the scientific progress happened in the 20th century, scientific materialistic monism became more popular, and the idea of consciousness being the product of changing states of brain became more popular. The idea that matter is the only reality and consciousness can be reductively explained as product of matter took more pace. And here they point out that Advaita Vedanta actually positions itself as a mirror image to this scientific materialistic monism, because it believes that whatever matter is to the materialistic to the materialistic monism people, the same is Brahman, which is to the Advaitic philosophy. Like everything comes out of Brahman, like everything is matter. For the materialist, everything is Brahman, which is akin to God. It is immaterial to Advaita Vedanta. And these discussions actually believe that this point of view could be a radical solution to the hard problem that David Chalmers had proposed. And yeah, to introduce that, they take us back to one of the oldest scriptures called Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad, which is a short narrative dialogue between a king and a sage, where the king is asking the sage, uh, what serves as light for man? You know, light called as Jyoti. What is this for a man? Then the sage gets into a dialogue saying that, you know, there is sun that illuminates the whole world for us, and that's how we see. And then the king then presses on the sage a little further and says that what if there is no sun? Then what happens at night? How do we see? Uh, and then the sage goes on saying that there is moon, and if there's no moon, then there is fire. If there is no fire, then the speech of man will direct man, like it'll serve as light for man. Uh, and upon pressing further, the king then asks, what if none of this is present in the life? Then what serves as light for man? At that point, the sage gives a revealing answer, where he says that the self of a man serves as light to the man when nothing externally can illuminate knowledge in your life. And the self here is called as Atma Jyoti, the self light, basically. Now the question comes, what do they mean by self? And what is the whole Atma Jyoti thing? Uh, in the context of Advaita Vedanta, which is basically, again, a commentary from this old Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, uh, the old sage Shankaracharya, he tries to interpret this whole dialogue and gives us some abstraction out of it. He says that self-jyoti in this whole dialogue was referred to as an infinite entity, something like akin to like pure consciousness, which is immaterial. They call this also Purusha or Atman. And then he goes further saying that this Atman is actually a reflection in your antakarna, which is like the deep, your deepest mind or the buddhi. So the pure consciousness, which is an immaterial form, gets reflected in your mind. And this reflection is what we actually experience in our everyday life and what we as consciousness scientists can investigate. This becomes our empirical consciousness. This empirical consciousness is also referred to as in the text as Chidabhasa, which literally translates to being a mirage. And this is identified with the mind or the buddhi, and the subject which is called the Jivatman, then designates himself as I. So, in a summary, the pure consciousness, the immaterial form, is getting reflected in our mind and becoming empirical consciousness, which we can feel or which we can investigate empirically. And this then also further gives rise to uh, the self, the concept of self as we know it today in psychology. And then this self, the self which identifies as I, uh, then identifies himself with the rest of the body organ mind complex. And I think that this whole idea of empirical consciousness being the mirage, which then gives the subject an identity of itself as the I, that this is me and this is my body. All of this, I think I found it to be very similar to Nishida's ideas that I think we were also discussing in the summer school, which was super cool. Another point to have some discussion later, I think. From this point on, I think I'll have to look into my books for some notes to talk about it. Uh,
I think you cover most of, if not all, the chapter already.
yeah,
So
yeah, I think there was just an important point which I kind of wanted to make. Let me just quickly try to find it. Yeah, they say again about like the Advaita perspectives on the heart problem, where they're saying that this Atman, who is the true subject, and the Antakarna that we were talking about before, which is the deep mind, which where the pure consciousness gets reflected. Uh, this Antakarna is becoming is the Jada, it's the objective, which is the insentient matter that we were talking about. And this is ever changing and this is limited in time and space. But the pure consciousness, the true subject, it becomes immaterial, which is transient and is unlimited by time and space. I think this was a very important distinction for me to highlight in this, which was also super interesting for me to know. Yeah. And the principle of superimposition, I have some notes on it, but I can't really find where they are. So if one of you guys want to really talk about it, I think that's also a good way to end the summary of the chapter, talking about the superimposition.
I can try to find, I think I, do you remember which page it is in the chapter? Because I
Yeah,
think
I think
it's
it's
scribbled.
299 or 300.
Ah, okay. Well, I mean, the part that I was wondering is whether this idea of the superimposition, yeah, it's connected to the, okay. I was wondering whether it connects to this idea that if Brahman is the ultimate reality, then in a sense there is nothing that is not Brahman, but so to speak, Maya or any appearance or any half truth is a misinterpretation of it. And it came to mind this example that Swami Sarvapriyananda uses often, which is the one of the snake and the rope. And I was wondering if it's the same. And it's this idea that you see a rope and you think it's a snake, right? And for you, the reality is, oh, you see a snake, but actually it's just a rope. And he uses, I think it's from the texts, but this idea that you might be looking at something that has its ultimate reality might be um, consciousness, but you misinterpret it as something else and you superimpose this other image on it. So that's what I got. about it.
Yes, I would completely agree with you. Thank you so much for that comment. And I think it kind of brings back to the first time when we were introducing the concept of consciousness in the Advaita Vedanta, that we were talking about how there's pure consciousness, something gets reflected and then it becomes empirical. And this reflection, which we are able to probe into, that's the level we are at right now, probably. That basically is what he's referring to as the superimposition,
Mhm.
which we need to transcend
Right,
and identify that there is something beyond that.
right.
Yeah,
And the knowledge that Advaita Vedanta talks about, which is really the part of the Jnana Yoga, I guess, is really the knowledge that this the knowledge of the superimposition, the knowledge that what you're looking at has a deeper nature, I guess, which is allowing you to transcend this level and in a sense see things as they truly are.
yeah. I also just found a nice analogy that they made here, that how trying to solve or trying to bypass the mind body problem that Descartes had introduced, which is also reflected in the heart problem of consciousness. We are talking about how Vedantic perspectives might be helpful here, but looking at the Vedantic perspective, another problem emerges. Now, the mind body problem becomes a consciousness matter problem. And then,
Mhm,
how do you transcend that?
mhm.
And to transcend that is why we need the superimposition principle.
I see.
Which, yeah, that's how I at least understood what they had written here, which I thought was a very good, I don't know, it's is it like a philosophical method to do something? Well, introducing new concept to bypass
Yeah, you have to make a new distinction every time, you find a new problem. Uh,
exactly.
it reminds me that a couple of days ago, I have a good friend who is also very much into yoga philosophy and Advaita Vedanta, and I sent him a voice message while I was driving, and I told him, why do people exist? Why if there is only Brahman? Why if there is only the one? Why, there's subjects? Why individual subjects? Why individuality? And this is not an easy question to answer, right? Because even in Advaita Vedanta, when you have this perspective, then you still have to account for the appearance of things. You have to account for how the world looks like and the fact that you do have the appearance of the mind, the body, the identification with the body and the self and the mind and all these things that are transient, and you have the what, for instance, Bernardo Kastrup calls like the dissociation of the subjects. Like you have this splitting, even if you have some ideas of a universal consciousness, pure conscious that ultimately is non in is it's unified, it's not individualized, but then you do have disappearance of individualization, and how does that come into being? And that's a very interesting question. So yeah, the
Hmm.
very interesting question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, intuitively, I always think of it as something like a byproduct of physical manifestation. If we are thinking of the pure consciousness to be immaterial, non-physical thing, entity, then something has to happen for it to materialize. And maybe that's the byproduct of, the individualization is just a byproduct of it.
Yeah. So thanks for the great intro to the chapter. It was a very, very nice outline, and I think it covered very well everything I also found very interesting in this chapter. Um, I have just a couple of things that I want to say in particularly sparked my interest, and I think this chapter is amazing in highlighting those little things that I think are very interesting for me, particularly, and maybe for us in general in the quality structure project, because um, they do get to the question of the hard problem. How does, in a sense, subjective and objective perspective on consciousness interact? How can we even analyze consciousness from different perspectives, even potentially scientifically? Um, whether conscious is beyond, the scope of science, but also how does that connect to ontology, like to what exists, to metaphysics, and ultimately for me, how does this also compare to IIT, which is in a sense asking very similar questions, right? And one thing that strikes me all the time as very, very interesting is with Advaita Vedanta is this idea that ultimately consciousness is identical with being itself, that it can only possibly be that consciousness is existence. It doesn't even have existence. It must be existence um, to really make sense, which is something that I think is the starting point of IIT in a sense. And I find it very nice that there is this convergence. Um, any comments on the ontology, on this aspect of consciousness fundamental with this particular twist from you? I don't know.
I think this particular twist is not entirely clear to me. I think actually after, so it's clear what I mean by empirical consciousness, which I think is what I call consciousness or experience. I get, I yeah, I get quite lost when you go beyond that. And I really don't understand the metaphysical necessity of going past that. And I don't really understand the basically the well, what kind of epistemology could support this claim.
Can you say more about
So
that? What do you
yeah, I
mean
mean, so if I understand correctly, the claim is that Brahman is the ultimate reality. So this pure, original, unified consciousness is the source of everything. And by everything, I mean of all this illusion that we take to be the physical world um, and our own individual self and our own mind and so on and so forth. But it's not, yeah. I mean, I'm not really understanding what is the why this layer is necessary, or really like they claim as Sai summarized, and I think you also said something about it, like the main claim is that this is a monistic. If we want to reconcile this with uh, Western categories, like this would be a monistic theory or approach to consciousness or metaphysics in general. But um, but yeah, before he sort of say that this is the that substance, that unique substance, is physical or like matter, and then when he talks about pure consciousness or Brahman, I guess that's not the case anymore, or at least if it's not, I don't know. I think I just got a bit lost
I see.
in the entire process. By the way, I think the chapter is really, really well written, and especially the first half until where I felt that I could keep up with. I really, really appreciated it, and I think it's a great introduction. But yeah, I at a certain point it just stopped to make sense to me, or at least make sense entirely. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I can probably take it. I was trying to find this one particular paragraph that I think maybe might answer your question if we
Mhm.
try to read it together.
Sure.
It's actually on page 297 under
Okay.
the section called Advaita Perspectives on the Heart Problem.
Mm,
Uh, and here they're basically in the first paragraph again introducing that mind, which is the antakarna here, is held to be a form of matter, subtle
mm,
matter, but matter nonetheless. And hence, mind can influence the body and vice versa. When both being matter, there is no objection in this principle that mind body interaction. The Descartes mind body problem is solved in this
yeah.
sense here. But then, because we have this whole other concept of having this pure consciousness,
Yeah.
and uh, just right now think of it as a concept which is there, which is a fundamental of this philosophical idea. This pure consciousness is then getting reflected in the antakarna, which is still the matter. But now the question is, if this antakarna, the mind, which is a form of a matter, how does it interact with this pure consciousness, which is not materialistic?
Mm.
So that's the consciousness matter problem that gets introduced here. And in the next page, on the 298, they're then again just explaining where did it go? Yeah, where like a material mirror can reflect light, but how can a material antakarna reflect the immaterial
Mm,
atman?
mm, mm.
And they give a kind of an answer to it later in the paragraph where they're talking about superimposition.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess it's probably, yeah, that part that is not entirely clear to me. And also I got especially confused when they make a parallel with the Buddhism, or maybe they show the divergence that is present in Buddhism. That I really didn't understand the difference between the two. Um,
So
I think sorry, just to I think that the point is that they're claiming that Buddhism rejects this ultimate nature as unity,
Mhm.
but yeah,
okay, can you say something more about the difference with Buddhism? I'm also not entirely clear. I understand it completely.
Yeah, I'm also not like super well versed with Buddhism, but like a few years ago, I was just reading like a book. I think it was called How Not to Be a Buddhist.
mm,
Yeah, and I think one thing that really stuck with me from there was this whole identity of being selfless in Buddhism that takes the
Right.
center stage. And the self here, of course, they don't mean it as the self like we psychologists call the self, but the self like the Vedanta people are calling the self, which is the Atman here, which is exactly what these guys are also pointing out here, that Buddhism is really rejecting the idea of pure consciousness, something immaterial, something beyond what we experience,
Mhm.
still being there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there is this idea that, and again, I don't know much about Buddhism, especially the metaphysics of Buddhism, like some practices or in meditation, maybe I'm a bit more familiar with. But it seems to me that there is a lot of convergence, especially with Advaita Vedanta. They are very, very close. But the ultimate disagreement is about the nature of the fundamental
mm,
reality. And for Buddhism, ultimately, there is nothingness. There is no eternal subject that is the Atman, that is also identical with Brahman. And it is this immaterial, eternal, spiritual, kind of pure consciousness. For Buddhism, there is a layer beneath this that is also, in a sense, I don't know, something like I'm not sure if this is even true. So don't quote me, but that's my feeling. So yeah, so Francesca, I think you raised some very, very interesting questions, and in my mind, there is a sort of logical argument or a progression that
mm,
I like to go through if I can for a minute, which maybe can give you an insight into why I think this is reasonable. This makes a lot of sense. So let's say I think Advaita Vedanta and an IIT start from a similar um, idea that it's basically the realization that conscious must be fundamental. If we start by, assuming that there is a physical world out there and we ask why there is consciousness, it's very hard to get one from the other, especially conscious from the physical world. So they agree that conscious must be fundamental. They agree that conscious must, in a sense, be connected to existence itself. And another thing is that when you were saying sometimes, I don't remember if it was, uh, well, there was a point where it was Advaita Vedanta was described almost as a form of physicalism, because in a sense, it's true that everything is physical. It's true that Brahman is physical. In a sense, it's quintessentially what physical reality is consciousness, if you understand it correctly. Just like in IIT, you can say there is an objective description of physical reality. We're not saying that that thing doesn't exist. We just say that that thing
Yeah.
is a particular perspective or indirect way, so to speak, to describe consciousness from the outside, so to speak, right? From inside, consciousness feels like experience. From the outside, it looks like maximally reducible cause-effect power. Yeah, you could say something like that, right? So, and since these are monisms, there is this ambiguity. You can describe it one way or the other, but ultimately you are describing the same
Yeah.
thing. But here's now the important question that I think brings Advaita Vedanta and IIT to diverge. And it is, okay, there is consciousness, which means that there are intrinsic entities that exist for
Yeah.
themselves, and they are conscious. Ultimately, those are clusters of experience. But now the question is, but how is there more than one? Why so many? Like, how come? Why is there exactly, I don't know how many there are right now in the universe, but let's say, I don't know, some trillions, whatever, trillions of trillions, I have no idea. Why exactly that number? Basically, how come that the exclusion principle kicks in, right? And in a sense, you can even push IIT itself to say, for the principle of sufficient reason, there must be an answer to this question. Just like there is an answer to all the other questions in IIT, there must be an answer to the question of why there are n subjects at any given point in the universe. And it sounds very arbitrary that it's just n. Now there's one more, now there's one less, and it always fluctuates, right? So IIT just takes that as face value. It says, well, my consciousness has borders. Therefore, I know that it is what it is, neither less nor more. And I can also infer that there are other subjects and they have their own consciousness and they have borders. So exclusion exists as a just a principle in reality. Um, but by the way, I want to notice one thing that it's a little bit of a tangent in the progression of the argument, but um, IIT applies exclusion not to consciousness itself, but to the contents of experience, right? It says my content is limited. I could be experiencing
Mm.
more or less, which means literally I could have more or less qualia, more or less submodalities, more or less distinctions and relations, but I don't, right? And in a sense, from that, it infers that there are borders between subjects, but it is a claim about the contents of experience, what I am experiencing, not about the subject of experience itself, like the experiencer, because there's no notion of
There is no.
actually subject of experience in IT,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so Advaita Vedanta instead, I think, goes a little more in saying, yeah, but what you experience is not you. The contents of experience are, like Sai was saying, mind is almost like, matter. It changes. It's not you. You are the thing that stays beyond everything that changes. So
Mm.
there is a disagreement with IIT. You are not your distinctions and relations. Distinctions and relations, in a sense, change, right? That's just the content. But
Yeah,
anyway,
but I mean, sorry, just a small comment on this. I mean, it kind of made me feel like the you that IIT is talking about is kind of the you that gets reflected, which
yeah.
generates this
Yeah.
sense of I.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
That's the, well, not necessarily. That's, I think it's a important bifurcation here, as in, uh it seems that this Vedantic perspective does not, so okay, two interpretation. One, it seems that they don't uh conceive that there can be a dissociation between the self and the mind, or at least that's how I read it, but maybe I was a bit superficial. On the other hand, there is the fact that and I think it's a bit complicated, but there is there are at least two important and very different sense in which we can talk about the self, or and the eye of the mind, so to say, right? And and I think actually this is something that applies to IIT to a certain extent, insofar as for example, right now, if we take the IIT perspective, I'm having an experience where there is, when I'm present in my own experience, so to say, also I'm seeing my face in the screen. I have a whole body and tactile sensation, whatever that refers to my subject, whatever. But then, if there is also a sense, a very important sense, in which you that I'm seeing, that I'm experiencing right now, your voice, your face, your ideas, and everything. These are all part of my consciousness, which is not the self. It is a distinction, because the self is a subset of this broader I. So the way I've always made sense of it for myself when I think about IIT is to think that in IIT the I is the cause effect structure, or even just the structure of the phenomenal experience, and the self is just a little stupid Q shape or phi shape, as it's now called, that is just as any other content. Of course, it's important for a lot of reasons, but it's just as any other content. So, but the I, in a sense, is that something like the Kantian transcendental self is like the sum of all the content of experience. That what I feel about IT. But sorry, Matteo, I think I kind of
No, no,
hijacked your
no,
argument,
no,
which
no, no.
was very interesting.
That's great. So I completely agree. I think for IT, the self is a content of experience. You can have a selfless experience. You can literally have what some people even call, ego dissolution or ego death. In that case, that is the context concept of self that I think we're talking about. Um, Autobiographical memory, all these kind of things. I think this concept of cognitive self, if you wish, I think in Advaita Vedanta is also considered as that's part of the mind that is not you. I don't know what they call it because the self usually is referred to as the I mean, I think that word is actually more
The
metaphysical.
Atman. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not like I think there is a in the psychology, in the ontology of mind of Advaita Vedanta, which is very, very refined. I think it's incredibly intricate and interesting. Your idea of yourself is also a content of your experience, is not necessarily, that's not what the Atman is. The Atman is what stays,
Yeah,
beneath, yeah, beyond everything.
is Aristotelian substrate essentially.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
little bit like that. It's more like, it's also like what they call the witness consciousness. Like it's the fact that I
Mm.
think, I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Sai.
No, I don't know about the witness consciousness. I've only
Oh,
heard the terminology of pure consciousness.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but it's this idea that the observer, so to speak,
Yeah.
the subject itself or the experiencer that stays even when you are not actually having an experience that has a self as a content. Um, but yeah, so in the progression I was going through, so basically, so far what I wanted to convey was that both IIT and Advaita Vedanta start from this idea that conscious must be fundamental, and then there is this realization that there seem to be more than one subject of experience, and then there is the question, how come? Why is that? And I think at this point they branch. Like IIT takes very seriously the exclusion principle, axiom, and postulate, and says, well, it's just a fact that basically from the just like we don't explain the initial conditions of the universe, that's just a given. It's just it is what it is. then the initial condition of the universe were such that universal TPM had those, values, and that derives in a specific number of subjects, of complexes or intrinsic entities, and that's it. There are objective borders. There is a multiplicity of subjects. That's it. That's the IIT perspective. It's just it's actually a monistic view in terms of that only consciousness exists, but it is pluralistic because there are more than one. There is more than one subject of experience at all times. I mean, it's maybe I don't know if you can really annihilate subjects in IIT because you always reshape things, right? Ultimately, I guess there is a maximum possible that is that every micro unit is a monad and is a complex. So there is this ceiling of subjects, which is very arbitrary if you think about like why that number. I really want to know this answer, the answer to this question. But then Advaita Vedanta instead says, well, actually the separation between subjects is illusory. Like we are separating the content of experience. I know that I'm not you because I don't have access to your contents of experience. But if the pure consciousness is not the content, is what stays, lies beneath the content, is the witness consciousness that experiences all the contents. And in principle, is even still there where there's no content. In a sense, there's just pure
Yeah.
existence, whatever that means. Then the exclusion principle starts to be a little like maybe we could conceive of a way in which we can go beyond that. And between there is no subject, which we exclude because consciousness exists, that's the zeroth axiom. There is only one subject, and there's more than one subject. It seems like the more than one subject, the number is arbitrary. Why exactly that number? The zero we exclude, so it can only be one. In a sense, that's my reasoning.
I think. Sorry.
No, no, no,
Uh,
no. It's very reasonable. I would just want to mention that there is though a third alternative, which is there's actually no subject in a sense, ultimately, which I think it's a little like maybe more of the Buddhist way to go. I'm not sure. We should talk to a Buddhist.
yeah, I think there is one difference when you say one subject. There is one subject, as in I am the only subject, like a drastic solipsism, which
Yes.
we also should discard for other reason. But then also clearly this one. But from your explanation, argument, call it as you want, that thank you so much because okay, now I think I understand a bit better. Um, but from what you say, I think that it kind of comes naturally to think that there is only one subject, as a principle of identity, right? Because if you remove all the differences, then
Right. Yep.
it's kind of natural, I guess.
Yeah, and
I don't
some people
know.
and we sometimes talk about the fact that, I mean, it's a bit like, Leibnizian monads that have like no window. So each subject is a universe in itself, right? So there can only possibly be, it's inconceivable to have two experiences. They're so compartmentalized and impenetrable to each other that you might even argue there is no perspective from which two subjects exist because every perspective is a subject. So unless you have this view of nowhere or God, you don't. These are just separate universes, right? So, but then on top of this, which I was trying to highlight the similarities, of course, then Advaita Vedanta does actually have a notion of a subject that persists. It's spiritual, it's immaterial, it's eternal. And you might, of course, you might disagree. Like IIT has this idea that if you take up subject of experience and you completely disgregate it and disintegrate it into monads, there's no sense in which the original subject is still there. Actually, IIT goes completely in the other direction. It says that when you wake up in the morning, technically you are completely a different subject. There is no sense of persistence. And actually, from one second to the other of your experience, there's no sense of persistence. You are never the same subject. Everything is, it's in, Julio likes to say, it is incredibly, embracing the impermanence even more than Buddhism because it says nothing persists, not even one picosecond. Every picosecond universe is a brand new thing, there's brand new subjects, which is an extreme view. Like, I like to weigh both views. Like, one is that there is only one subject, is Brahman. It is this pure consciousness that is undifferentiated, and then maybe what you actually differentiate and disassociate from it are pockets of contents of experience with illusion that you are an individual subject, but ultimately there is only one consciousness. It is eternal and immutable, etc. And the other one is that it's actually nihilist. There's no subjects, everything changes all the time, it lasts only 1 picosecond. So these are pretty extreme views. Yeah, so that's where I
But
wanted to go.
but I feel like the second view, even, I mean, despite having the whole annihilation, might actually just be ignoring the eternal thing, and what it's again probing is just this reflection part, which which we can probe, the thing they're calling empirical consciousness again, because they also go to the lens of saying that is also transient, that's also ever changing and is defined by time and space. So that keeps ringing in my head every time I'm hearing these things, and I'm like, both these things make sense. Maybe one is rather incomplete and the other seems more complete in whatever way you can look at it.
I wrote down, I think, yeah, is IIT a theory of empirical consciousness? Because it sounds very reasonable. And then what about the pure consciousness? And
Yeah.
I think it's outside of the scope of IIT. But like you say, actually, it kind of means that these things are not necessarily incompatible. And when I was thinking about IIT, I mean, I think it would be nice to explore alternatives where you can maybe, I mean, can you change it and stretch it and adapt it to maybe take into account our intuitions that there is some persistence of subjects? Maybe there is a version of IIT that is compatible with this. And by the way, sorry for speaking so much about IIT, but I think it's interesting to to connect. Yeah, to connect to this.
But Matteo, what do you think about, you were also giving this example of how we take it for granted that the universe's beginning state, and you are comparing it to the TPM, we can think of it like that. If we go down that path, do you think maybe there is a way to probably integrate this idea of eternal pure consciousness into IIT still?
Possibly. What do you mean? Can you say more?
Yeah, I cannot. I'm afraid. I was just like thinking out really loud and trying to connect whatever you're saying, because okay, maybe the question should be more framed like, what do you think is a way to kind of try to integrate this pure consciousness into the framework of IIT? How do you scale it up, basically?
Yeah, so I think one obstacle to doing this is that IIT, despite being very metaphysical, and taking, yeah, talking about consciousness fundamental, and also playing with the limits of our ability, both for introspection and scientific investigation. So IIT is based on, operational uh, procedure. So it tells you you can investigate the physical world, and that's the only way you can probe consciousness that is not your own, or also your own, but indirectly and quantitatively and rigorously. You can only probe the physical world operationally, and therefore, the moment you don't have the ability to manipulate and observe, then you can't really say much about that. And there might be something about the origin of the universe that is just outside of we just can't, we don't have an explanation. And this is the same problem with physics, of course. We don't know, was there an initial TPM? Why was it the way it was? If we can't probe it, then there's nothing empirical we can use as knowledge to build our ontology. So I think IT is limited in that, but it also doesn't mean that it's incompatible with speculations or some pure a priori, metaphysical maybe reasoning that tells you, well, whatever we cannot investigate empirically, then we have to speculate about. And you could attach this sort of non-operational, not empirical, not evidence-based, so to speak, metaphysical part to IIT, and complete it by saying, well, there's all these questions that are unanswered about the origin of the universe, the number of subjects, why things are exactly the way they are. And I like to say, since IIT appeals so much to the principle of sufficient reason that says that it must be a reason for why things are the way they are, then we have to resort to some other ideas that go beyond that, and maybe hypothesizing just one undifferentiated, reality that is a universal conscious is one way. Maybe Bernardo Kastrup's idea that there is one universal consciousness and there is dissociation within it that form individual subjects, and maybe that is why we experience exclusion is another way to go, which is very compatible with Advaita Vedanta, I think. So yeah, those are my 2 cents, honestly.
But I think in sorry, I'll say something about IIT as well, but I think in IIT also the it kind of goes the other way around because you start from experience. So since you want to what you're actually looking for is not a sufficient reason for the presence of that specific number of subjects, which most likely you don't even know, but you want a sufficient reason for the fact that your experience, that the content of your experience is limited. So you start from that, and because it's limited, then it must be the case that your consciousness as, so to say, border, your experience as, so to say, border, and therefore it's in principle reasonable that there are other subjects, I guess.
Yes. I mean, you're right. So there are, I think, two comments. One is that yes, it's true. You could take IIT as a theory of your experience. So as long as it
Yeah.
explains your experience, then that's it. It's complete, so to speak. It's achieved is goal. It's goal. But then I think IIT strives to get into this idea that it can provide an intrinsic ontology and tell us actually how the world is, right? And so you could, this would be maybe expanding it a little bit, but you could ask questions that go beyond
Yeah.
explaining an individual um, experience. And then, so this is just comment on the first part. The second claim is that yes, it's true, but again, in a sense, exclusion relies on your ability to tell what contents of experience you are having. And, there are some things that, I mean, for instance, you might claim it's the border of my experience is not due to the fact that I am a separate subject, but it's due to the fact that I don't have the mechanisms that allow me to access the
Mm.
state of your neurons, even though everything is connected through gravitational fields and whatever. So just like, we appeal to this argument when we say my introspection is limited because I can't introspect the internal
Yeah.
structure of the kernels that contribute color to my experience, but I can introspect the structure of space. Maybe I can use the same argument and say, well, maybe my introspective mechanisms are limited and I can't introspect the experience of the whole, but there is no objective border. Maybe something like that. So yeah, speculating a little bit, but
Yeah, and another comment on the relation of IIT, I think the connection that in IIT you don't have subjects at all, or like, sorry, you don't have persistence of subject over time, as I guess a funny consideration on the side when we talk about this Eastern tradition, which is essentially you at every time step, or like the next whatever number Matteo you want to add to it, uh, you are into this world, and you basically your present position in the state of affair of the world has been determined by other subjects, right?
very true.
And your choices, because IIT allows for free will, your choices will determine the position of countless Matteo from here to a long time in the future, right? So there is a sense in which in IIT there is really something like karma, right?
I
Because
think.
you come into existence with a karma debt, and then you leave some karma, either good or bad, who knows? In your case, mostly good, I'm sure, but It's I mean, I think it's just a parallel, but yeah.
I didn't think about, yeah, IIT and karma. Maybe that's another topic for another time. Silly to talk
Yeah,
Yeah.
about.
but essentially that's such a good parallel. That's exactly what a TPM is. I mean, a finite state automata machine. You have the states interdependent on other states. Yeah, it makes so much sense. I would buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been, I don't know, we're talking about these realities and futures and pasts and everything, and recently there was this news about the quantum computer and how maybe the existence of parallel universes and parallel realities might be true. And I was like wondering, how does all of this then fit into the whole framework of, I don't know, maybe not particularly IIT, but in general of whatever we are talking about here today. That always blows my mind.
Yeah.
I really don't know enough to talk about this topic, but
Yeah,
yeah.
we need a physicist here.
Mm.
I just also wanted to just ask a small question, actually. I remember during the summer school, during one of the discussion sections, uh, it was me, James, and a few other people in our group, and we came to this whole conclusion after Julio's talk that monoid is at the center of the entire theory. And the monoid is basically not just talking about consciousness, but it is talking about the existence. The experience is, it's not being, also, the experience is concept. And then I do not understand why did Matteo say that this kind of does not fit with the idea of Advaita Vedanta's consciousness, the pure consciousness idea. Am I missing some link here?
So, well, maybe I'm definitely missing one link, which is like what I mean. I think the problem, I think what doesn't fit is exclusion, is the idea that you cannot have you cannot have that there is a consciousness that somehow is, crosses the borders between the individual subjects that we consider, like basically you have individual atmans, if I understand correctly, but like a universal consciousness that is undifferentiated, and that doesn't seem to fit with the IIT idea that you have the exclusion principle. So each consciousness is intrinsic. So I think the monoid maybe refers more to intrinsicality, which is
Hmm.
okay. But then you have the exclusion part that says there are objective borders. There are subjects that are metaphysically independent and they exist independently from each other. There is no further,
But
level where, yeah, unified
I,
conscious.
I think I think what Sai is suggesting, if I understood correctly, is that I mean what you said, it seems perfectly acceptable within the picture depicted in the chapter we read, because what you're talking about is essentially what they call empirical consciousness. So it
Right.
would be natural that there would be that if we get to the point of a scientific explanation, we have a scientific explanation for the fact that different minds, so to say, have different content. I think Sai is suggesting if, and honestly, that will put me in murky waters with the IIT people. But honestly, I think uh there is nothing that in principle I think really prevent a sort of super entity, so to say, that supervenes on all other consciousness. Um, just using different axioms, so to say, because
Oh, okay.
it's a different kind of mind, right? So it in a sense, like if this is an intellectual exercise. It's not my interpretation of IIT, or not even necessarily a direction I think IIT should take. But if we want to imagine how to make these two pictures together, I think you could definitely say, well, we have this explanation of consciousness, which is based on the five axioms that are based on each individual empirical consciousness. And they are true for each individual empirical consciousness, most likely even in animals, aliens from very different worlds, and whatever. But there might be, as much as we have higher order mechanisms, as much as you can, whatever, there might be even something that stands, that builds on top of those minds, like some kind of hyper network over all the little networks, and of course, in this sense, there would be a sort of different set of rules, because it's a different kind of mind. Again,
So, are you saying that the five axioms are the axioms of empirical consciousness,
yeah,
but maybe one hypothesis is that actually only four axioms without exclusion are axioms for pure
yeah,
consciousness, because that would
yeah,
make a lot of sense. You already discard
yeah.
exclusion. All the other ones, they
Well,
seem
maybe
reasonable.
information, maybe
Yeah, I'm not sure
information,
about information. Yeah. Information that has
but
to be specific. Integration, yes. Intrinsicality, yes.
yeah.
I don't know about composition, but in any case, that's a very interesting idea. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to say, because when Julia was emphasizing about, IIT can also be a theory of existence, and it really made me wonder, what existence is he talking about? Is he talking about existence as the general existence, or existence of experience, phenomenological experience of me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Well, I think there will be more to talk about. It's
Yeah.
I'm impressed at how much stuff we could just discuss from this very good chapter. Mm.
Yeah.
So what's the
Thank you
rest
very
of the
much.
book like? I'm sorry, I was curious.
Yeah, sorry. Francesco, you can just say, I'll try to find the contents.
Now, I was just saying thank you very much, Sai, for suggesting this chapter specifically, and also for presenting it to us. And I think maybe if you wanna answer Matteo question, and then we could stop the recording, and
Yeah, just to know
but
where we could go with this meetings. Like what are the next topics we would like you think maybe?
Yeah, I actually found a quite other few interesting chapters from the book. One is called Consciousness Measurable or Immeasurable. I think that could probably be a good next chapter. It'll be a perfect transition. Or there is another one, which is Swami Vivekananda's concept of spirituality, transformation of consciousness from the human to the divine through synthesis of the yogas. Maybe that could also be a good bridging chapter. Uh, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff in here. And yeah, the other one was consciousness as a force, its nature and working.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the book is really a mixture of trying to explain spirituality and trying to understand how that connects to consciousness and the philosophy of consciousness. So there's also chapters about, can science explain spirituality, and like anomalous cognition towards a physical mechanism. So mystery of the soul and consciousness from the Sufi perspective. So there's literally a lot of mixture of things here. We can, I don't know, try to decide somehow.
Yeah, okay, we can
great.
talk about that. Great.
Yeah,
Thanks everybody.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
yeah. Thank you so much.